So this is a video I didn't think I would ever do on YouTube. Not only because of how basic my knowledge, in my own opinion, of cinematography was, it was also a field I never intended to explore on my YouTube channel. But now that I have, I'm really grateful for that request for making me understand this form of art better. I would have done this video anyway, as the video on movies with best cinematography was the first request I had received on this channel. Someone who wanted to hear my thoughts on something they were interested in. One of the major reasons I started YouTube and the thing I was most excited for doing YouTube. So I'm really glad that I was asked, and also for making me fall in love with something that I think everyone who watches anything unconsciously appreciates. Now let's just get on with the list. Now, this list will have 10 films and some honorable mentions. Though the video will not start with a film but the artist behind them, Roger Deakins. I didn't notice him through his style, but I just watched some new films this month, and the films that I had seen before that made an impact on me visually, I just Google who is the cinematographer. Well, this name kept coming up. This guy is a genius, and the film of his that I like the most isn't Blade Runner 2049. No, he has done masterful work in Prisoners, in No Country for Old Men, in Blade Runner 2049, which is on the list by the way. It's not just my favorite of his. My favorite film that Roger Deakins ever worked on is 1917. The reason is the way the movie conveys information. 1917 is a film where two soldiers fighting in World War II have to deliver an urgent message to call off an attack of their own on the Germans. The story is amazing and the dialogue too, but if this was a silent movie, it would still work. Now, just to provide further evidence of how much this film shocked me, is I had already seen Blade Runner 2049, but this film surpassed that in just the opening sequence. The opening sequence of 1917 is the most information I have ever gotten from any sequence in a film ever. The surroundings by which the characters are surrounded, like seriously, if I was an army commander on the opposing side, I wouldn't be able to gain more information seeing the army base myself through my own eyes. The scene opens up with our main character sleeping beside a tree with his friend Blake. This entire sequence, I think, is approximately 10 minutes of information dumped through camera. Remove the dialogues, put the film on silent, full volume down, and you will experience something special. As Scofield and Blake move through the army establishment to the control room, then the scenes start to change when they get closer to the front lines. With the soldiers that are on the front lines, when you see them, you understand just what our mission is, and it also establishes the difference a few miles can make. The difference between the front lines and where we start isn't much, but the difference in the state of soldiers says enough of how close the danger is. Then, as the film moves on, we cross the no man's land. We again get acquainted with the entire enemy base thoroughly, beautifully, and also the piece of land for which these soldiers are fighting for, what they are giving, sacrificing their lives for. And the film then moves on to the absolutely haunting display when Schofield is running through enemy territory in the night. All of this culminates with one of the greatest scenes ever shot for many people, though my favorite still is the first 10-minute sequence of the film. But when you see Schofield running through the battlefield as you want him to desperately wish for him to succeed, as you have experienced this with him through the genius of Roger Deakins, and then what cemented this as my number 2 best shot film I had ever seen was where this film ended, which looks nearly the same as the scene where the film first started, beside a tree, where our protagonist is now alone, lost his friend, what he was, he has become someone new now, and you feel that as you saw it happen because you were running with him. Genius, absolute genius. I could do a separate video on this film, and maybe I will, but I will have to stop talking about it as the video will turn out too long. Which now brings us to Blade Runner 2049, my second favorite of Roger Deakins. The premise of this film, I won't spoil you on that. Sorry, I did it with 1917. Just couldn't help myself. Blade Runner 2049, the world it is based on, is alien to us, a dystopian world, and that too after a certain blackout. Watch the movie, you will understand. Now, this movie is beautiful and perfect in the way it's shot. It should be my number one Roger Deakins film, if not for my bias of how good can a film convey information. And I think 1917 does that better, though that might be due to how alien the world should feel that Blade Runner is based in. My favorite sequence in this entire film is the ruins of Las Vegas. The way our protagonist explores a destroyed world where no one is supposed to live, ruins of an old city. I haven't seen Blade Runner 1, so I don't have full context on that, but this is definitely the peak of what this film did, visually, personally, for me. Which now brings us to Zodiac, which is a David Fincher film. The cinematographer for this film was Harris Savaitis. I don't know how you pronounce his name, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Alright, maybe this is the biggest surprise on this list, but the reason this film made the list was showcasing the presence of the villain, which in this film's case is Zodiac. There is a video essay already on this on YouTube, but if I briefly explain it, it's done through the color yellow. Yellow is the color which should be associated with good things, but in this film, it's not. The presence of the Zodiac in the entire film is shown through the color yellow, whether that be the pillars in the office that Robert and Paul Avery work in, or the taxi driver Zodiac shoots, or even the site where the lake is, where that whole scene takes place. The color yellow is the most identifiable, the one that sticks out the most. It is a genius way of showing the Zodiac's presence. David Fincher's films always have their own atmosphere, a sort of depressing one which is done amazingly well in Seven. But in terms of setting the atmosphere, this is David Fincher's best. Zodiac is the best David Fincher ever got visually. Which brings us to Inception. I mean, what is there to say? The cinematographer that works on this, I'm sorry I can't pronounce his name. He has worked on Memento, which I haven't seen by the way, Dark Knight Trilogy, which I have. He is right below Roger Deakins in terms of cinematographers I have come to admire while researching on it in these last 15 days. If we talk about my favorite Inception scene is the dream sequence at the start of the film. No need to elaborate further, not that I have enough skill set for that anyway. Now let's get into some animation. My favorites are Kung Fu Panda 2. It's breathtaking. The climax, the prophecy coming true, is some of the best experience I have ever had. Everything about this movie is chef's kiss. Which brings us to Hayao Miyazaki, my favorite director of all time, and the reason this video got delayed. It was The Boy and the Heron. I haven't seen that film yet, and considering the reviews, people were labeling it the most Miyazaki film ever made. I had to wait. Well, unfortunately, I couldn't see it, and that leaves us with just Spirited Away and one more film from Studio Ghibli. Talking about Spirited Away is just the train scene, which is tied with 1917's opening sequence as the best sequence I have ever laid eyes on. I remember watching Spirited Away for the first time some 4 years back, and then I knew nothing about how to analyze anything. Still, this scene left a mark on me. As I said at the beginning of this video, we all notice and appreciate how a film is shot even if it's unconscious. Now, cinematography does play a role in 2D animation as well. It's just differently done. Framing, use of color, angles, techniques like pans, tracking shots, it's similar in wording but differently done and with more freedom. The train scene in Spirited Away, when I first saw it, not knowing anything, understanding little, I had a smile on my face the entire time. This entire sequence is a painting. The other Ghibli film that I mentioned before will be in the honorable mentions. The third film, though, from animation is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And some of you maybe are shocked, why not Across the Spider-Verse? Though I agree Across the Spider-Verse is something new and beautifully shot too. The leap of faith just has too much and too big of an impact on me, which Across the Spider-Verse just didn't surpass. That entire sequence is equal to Aunt May's speech in Spider-Man 2 as my favorite scene from any Spider Man movie. But the reason for the Aunt May scene is dialogue. Here, it's how amazingly it's been presented to us, how well it's been directed. Now, moving on to Robert Yeoman and the Grand Budapest Hotel. Wes Anderson and Robert Yeoman are one of the best duos in the industry. The way the Grand Budapest Hotel is represented is absolutely magical. And I often hear the criticism that Wes Anderson is style above substance. Well, I disagree. I think the Grand Budapest Hotel has an amazing script. Wes Anderson's style is just too strong for it. Moving on to Interstellar. Genuinely, it would be a crime for me to even elaborate on this one, not just because that how obvious the pick is, just like Blade Runner was, but just how incapable I am of explaining anything about this film. But if you want to hear what my favorite scene was, it was definitely the black hole one. Moving on to my favorite overall short film of all time. It's Cinema Paradiso. I think it should be surprising to some, but the simple old way it's shot is what makes it amazing. The opening of Cinema Paradiso, even though it's a 80s film, gives you a 30s 40s feel. It establishes that atmosphere right off the bat. My favorite scene in this film is when Toto is waiting outside the house of the girl he likes. The way it's shown that the days are passing, it's absolutely beautiful. The reason this film had to be on this list was the romance for cinema this film invokes in you, the impact cinema has on our lives, and what TV's OTT platforms are taking away from us. Cinema Paradiso had to be on the list. Now, honorable mentions: Ponyo from Studio Ghibli. Miyazaki has never worked with color better in any of his films that he has in Ponyo. Wind Rises, Miyazaki's love letter to airplanes. Across the Spider-Verse, Prisoners, Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, a little bit of cheating should be allowed. Doctor Who Twice Upon a Time, where the two doctors shake hands, and the episode 1015 of One Piece, especially Luffy's dream sequence. I know these aren't films, but they are just too good to avoid for me. So that's all for this one. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope I will see you next time.